The first time anyone in Dodge City heard Sister Catherine scream was the morning old Mr. Harper died sitting upright in his rocking chair. Folks swore his eyes were still open. Some said he had been dead since dawn, but it was Catherine who stepped on his porch to bring him medicine and came running back down the street, yelling that he was smiling at her. People talked about that scream for weeks. They joked that even heaven must have jumped. But what they did not know was this. That scream was nothing compared to the one she let out later. By the time you hear what made her scream the second time, you might feel it in your own chest. The one that started everything. It began on a burning hot afternoon near the Cimarron. Sister Catherine O'Rourke was driving the mission wagon alone. The sun was so sharp it felt like it sliced straight through her veil. The trail was empty. No rider, no cattle, no sign of trouble, until she heard a sound that did not belong to summer. A short, sharp crack from somewhere beyond the ridge. Not thunder, not a snapping branch. She had heard that sound once before outside the mission gate. Gunshot. She stopped the wagon, called out once, got no answer. She stepped down and walked toward the tall grass. Then she saw him. A man leaning against a bale of hay behind an old log house, his shirt soaked dark on one side, his face pale, like the sun had drained the color right out of him. He looked at her as if he had been waiting for her all day, like the whole hot afternoon had been holding its breath just to bring the two of them together. His lips were dry, his voice barely there. "Sister, I need your help." He tried to push himself up, failed. When she reached him, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. It was not rough. It was desperate. The kind of grip a man gives when he knows he's losing strength fast. He pulled her closer. His breaths were shaky, shallow, broken. "Sit. Please sit right here. Just trust me." She thought he was delirious, thought he did not know what he was saying. But then she saw the wound on his leg, a gunshot close to the artery, blood pulsing out slow but steady. She knew enough to understand what that meant. If she did not put weight on it, he would bleed out before sundown. So she sat where he told her to sit, right there on that bale of hay, right over the place where the wound hid beneath her. The moment she sat down, she felt the heat of his blood through her clothes, and something else, a hard shape pressed against the hay, a worn leather pouch, stuffed so full it almost poked upward. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw fear in a grown man look exactly like a prayer. What was inside that pouch, and why had someone tried to kill him for it? Catherine felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears as she pressed her weight on his wound. The man tried to steady his breathing. It came out shaky, uneven, almost like a horse trying to stand after a long winter. He whispered his name, Jack Hollister, and that he was not supposed to still be alive. She asked who shot him. His answer was a slow exhale that sounded more like regret than fear. People who did not want the truth getting out. Then his eyes rolled for a second. She panicked, pressed harder, told him to stay with her. He forced a breath and nodded. She did not know how she managed it, but somehow she got him onto the mission wagon. He was heavy. Every bump in the trail made him groan. The sun was dropping lower, turning the grass gold. She kept talking to him, partly to keep him awake, partly so she would not think about the blood drying on her skirt. She said things she usually kept to herself, that she missed her mother, that she hated Kansas dust, that she had never sat on a wounded man in her entire life and hoped she never would again. He tried to smile at that. It came out crooked. When the wagon reached his ranch, she felt a strange pull in her chest. Something in that empty yard felt like it had been waiting on her, too. The place looked forgotten. The barn sagged. The house had one shutter barely hanging on, but it was peaceful, the kind of quiet that made even a scared woman breathe easier. Inside the barn, she laid him on a blanket. The wound was worse than she thought. A clean-through shot, but deep and torn. Someone had aimed to kill, not warn. She cleaned it with what little she had. Tore part of her underskirt for bandages. He flinched when the cold water hit. Then apologized for flinching. That made her laugh without meaning to. It surprised both of them. When she checked the leather pouch she had felt earlier, he tensed like a man waiting for a punch. She opened it just enough to see the edge of a little book, the kind a shopkeeper uses for debts. But this one was older, worn, filled with names and numbers, written fast and angry. There was also a badge that did not belong to him, and a letter with a broken wax seal. Tucked beneath the ledger was a small photograph, worn soft at the edges. A young woman stood beside Jack, her smile bright, her hand on his arm. Catherine did not ask who she was, but Jack watched her face closely, as if the memory still lived in him like an old ache. She looked at him. His eyes told her everything. He was in trouble far bigger than a leg wound. And saving him meant she was in it too. She wrapped the bandage tight. Saving his life was the easy part, and somewhere deep down she already knew it. Then sat back, her hands shaking. She had never asked for danger, never asked for secrets, but both had come to her anyway. What was she supposed to do now with a wounded stranger, a pouch full of trouble, and night falling fast outside? Catherine barely slept that night. Every time the wind pushed against the old barn board, she thought someone was coming for Jack. She kept checking his bandage, checking his breathing, checking the door, even prayed a little, though it sounded more like arguing with heaven than asking for help. Right before sunrise, she slipped back into Dodge City for supplies. The streets were quiet. A few saloon lamps still burned low, like tired eyes refusing to close. She headed toward the general store, keeping her veil low, but halfway there she heard shouting, a man yelling that he had rights. Two others kicking over his tools. It was the Ramirez family. Good people, hard-working. They lived near the river. But this morning their porch was smashed, their windows broken, and their young boy was being shoved against a tree by two men she did not recognize. She rushed forward without thinking, told them to stop, told them the boy was scared and half asleep and hurting. One man turned to her with the slow smile of someone who enjoyed breaking things. He said the Ramirez family had not paid enough for grazing rights. Said they needed a reminder. She told them to leave. Her voice did not even shake. Maybe her nerves were too tired to shake. The bigger man stepped close enough that she could smell last night's whiskey on his clothes. He told her to mind her own business. Then he slapped the boy hard enough to knock him down. That moment did something to her. Something sharp and hot. It was the first time in her life she understood that staying quiet was its own kind of sin. She knelt beside the boy and held him, even while the men walked away laughing. Later, she learned their names. Silas McGraw's men, the same men who had hunted Jack, the same men who would hunt again. And suddenly the numbers in that leather pouch made sense. The violence, the threats, the fear in every rancher's voice. It all pointed to the same man running Dodge City like a private kingdom. And once you see who is really holding the whip hand, you cannot unsee it, no matter how much you wish you could. When Catherine returned to the barn, she told Jack everything. He listened without blinking. When she finished, he looked at her with tired eyes and said the part she already knew in her heart. Silas will not stop. Not until he owns every acre near this river. Not until anyone who stands in his way is gone. She sat beside Jack on the barn floor. The morning light came through the boards in thin lines. She realized she was already involved, already too deep, and maybe she did not want to step back out. Before we continue, take a slow sip of your tea and settle in. Tell me what time it is for you and where you're listening from. And if you would like more stories like this, you can tap subscribe so you do not miss the next part. Catherine had never planned a trap in her life. She had never even chased a chicken without feeling guilty after. But that evening, sitting on the barn floor beside Jack, she realized something plain and simple. If they waited for the law in Dodge City to help them, they would be burying him by the end of the week. So right there on that dirt floor, a quiet woman and a half-broken rancher started planning a move that could get them both killed. So she asked the question that surprised even her. What do we do now? Jack looked at her like a man who had been waiting for her to say those words. He told her there was only one chance. They needed more evidence, not just numbers on a page. They needed signatures, letters, the things Silas kept locked in his office near the railroad camp. Catherine rubbed her hands together. partly from nerves, partly from the night air creeping in through the cracks of the barn. She had never broken into anything before, not even a cookie jar as a child. But the memory of that boy being slapped in the street still burned in her chest. She nodded, said she would go. Jack insisted on coming with her. Even with his injured leg, he pulled himself upright and tested his weight like a man trying to prove something to himself. She tried to tell him no, but he gave her a look that was stubborn enough to silence her. Together they rode at dusk, heading toward the railroad sheds where Silas kept his makeshift office. The sky was a deep orange, the kind of color that made ordinary folks stop and admire it, but for them it felt like riding straight into a storm. The camp was quiet, only a few lamps burning low. Catherine spotted 2 guards near a pile of crates. Yeah, they were talking loudly, arguing about who owed who money for a hand of cards. That gave her and Jack just enough time to slip behind the tool shed. Her heart hammered so hard she thought the guards might hear it. Inside the shed, they found the office door cracked open. Jack squeezed through first, leaning on the frame for balance. Catherine followed, holding her breath. The room smelled like tobacco and old sweat. On the desk sat a metal lockbox with a ledger underneath it. The same handwriting as the book in the pouch, only this one was thicker, filled with pages bent from constant use. Catherine opened it carefully. Her hands shook as she scanned the rows of names. Every rancher, every bribe, every acre taken by force. It was enough to put Silas in prison for years. If, of course, they lived long enough to put it in front of the right eyes. Jack whispered for her to hurry. Voices outside grew louder. Someone was heading toward the shed. Their boots crunched close, too close. If that door opened, both of them were finished. So who was coming toward them now? And did that person already know they were inside? The footsteps outside the shed grew louder, then stopped so close that Catherine felt the wood tremble under her hand. She held her breath. Jack tightened his grip on the desk, ready to fight with one good leg if he had to. Then, by some mercy, she never forgot. The man outside turned away. His boots crunched toward the campfire instead. The moment the sound faded, Jack pulled her toward the back door and they slipped into the night like 2 shadows that refused to die. Every step away from that shed felt like walking a tightrope strung over a river full of rattlesnakes. They rode all the way to Dodge City before sunrise. They carried the ledger to the federal marshal the very next morning. Word spread faster than a prairie fire. It took weeks for the circuit judge to arrive, but the town had already made up its mind. When the hearing finally came, every seat in the room was filled, and even folks who swore they did not care about ranch wars found a reason to stand near the doorway and listen. But for once, the town was watching. People lined the street. Mothers held children close. Ranchers stood with their hats in their hands, waiting to see if the stories whispered in saloons were true. Jack walked with a limp, but stood tall when they reached the courthouse steps. Catherine walked beside him, not as a nun anymore, but as a woman who had made her choice. When she spoke, the room went still. She read every name from the ledger, every threat written in the margins, every lie that Silas used to choke a town into silence. Silas tried to shout her down. Tried to call her a liar. Tried to blame Jack. But his voice kept cracking, like even his throat finally grew tired of the lies he fed it. And when the sheriff found the lockbox Catherine had pointed to, the room shifted. People who had kept their heads down for years finally lifted their eyes. One by one they nodded. One rancher stood, then another. Then every man who had been pushed off his land stepped forward and declared what happened. Silas was taken away, red-faced and furious, but powerless at last. Jack thanked Catherine for saving his life. She thanked him for teaching her to stop hiding behind fear. A month later, after many letters to the bishop and to Rome, she sat across from him one last time. He began the dispensation papers with steady hands and said, "You have lived the vows more bravely than many who kept them. Go in peace." The wedding at the Hollister Ranch was small, just a few friends, a warm breeze, the sound of the Cimarron moving slow and steady behind them. The habit lay folded in a trunk, waiting for the day Rome's answer would come. But on that warm afternoon by the Cimarron, Catherine walked to Jack in a simple blue cotton dress, her red hair loose for the first time since she was 16. He looked at her with the calm of a man who finally had something worth living for. And if you have ever looked at someone that way, you know it is the kind of moment a person carries to the grave, and that is how two people who never meant to cross paths ended up saving each other. Sometimes life does not ask what you planned. Sometimes it asks what you're willing to stand up for. So let me ask you this. What would you have done if you were the one holding that ledger in the dark, knowing the truth could cost you everything? If this story moved you even a little, tap like so more folks can find it. And if you want more Western tales filled with grit and heart, go ahead and subscribe. While you do, tell me where you are listening from today and what time it is for you, because I always love hearing who's riding along with these stories.